The sound that rips through the silence isn't a scream but the tearing of paper, a dry, violent sound, cutting through the air of a crowded room and piercing a mother's heart. The sound of an entire universe being torn in two, then four, then into pieces too small to count. For 17-year-old Noah King, that sound was like glass shattering inside his ears. He instinctively pressed his hands to his head, a gesture he'd used since childhood, and his body began to sway back and forth, a human pendulum searching for a center that no longer existed. The fragments of his drawing, the product of 300 hours of silent observation, floated in the air like the ashes of a dream before settling on the polished auditorium floor. The man who'd torn it, renowned Professor Louis Schneider Stan, looked at Noah with icy contempt and uttered words that would echo forever. "This isn't art. It's not architecture. It's a useless obsession. You're blind to the real world." But he was wrong. Noah wasn't blind. In fact, he was the only one who saw the truth. Hello, everyone. I wonder where you're watching from today. Wherever you are, I hope this story finds a safe space with you. Subscribe now so you don't miss the unfolding of stories like this, which remind us that true vision doesn't always come from the eyes. My name is Hannah Miller, and I'm Noah's mother. Telling his story is like trying to describe a color no one has ever seen. From a young age, Noah didn't communicate with words, but with lines. While other children learned to say mommy and daddy, Noah learned the language of shapes, angles, perspectives. The first gift he truly loved wasn't a car or a ball, but a set of graphite pencils of varying thicknesses. He held them with an almost reverent delicacy, as if they were extensions of his own soul. The world, for most of us, is a place of noise, chaotic conversations, and interactions. For Noah, it was a place of patterns. He found symphonies in a spider's web, poetry in the cracks of a sidewalk, and entire cathedrals in the map of veins on the back of my hand. The autism diagnosis came when he was 5. For many, the word sounds like a sentence. For me, it was a key that unlocked the door to his world, allowing me to understand why he organized his pencils by shade of gray, why the sound of the blender made him shrink in pain, and why he could spend hours staring at a city skyline without blinking. It wasn't a defect, it was a different operating system, a system that processed reality with a depth and precision my neurotypical mind could never achieve. His father, Jacob Davis Popov, loved his son with all his might, but struggled to understand. Jacob is a practical man, an engineer who believes in formulas and results. He saw Noah's genius, but also saw the chasm separating him from what the world considered normal. "Hannah, he needs to learn to communicate, to look people in the eye," he'd say, his voice heavy with a worry that sometimes sounded like frustration. I understood his fear. The world isn't kind to those who don't follow its unwritten rules. But forcing Noah to be someone he wasn't felt like a greater cruelty. His communication was drawing. And what communication? At 10, after a single trip to the city center, he returned home and, for a week, locked himself in his room. When he finally opened the door, he showed us a sheet of paper a meter long. On it, drawn from memory, was a 10-block stretch of the city, viewed from above. Every window, every antenna, every parked car was there. Jacob was shocked. I cried, not from sadness, but from awe. He wasn't withdrawing from the world. He was absorbing it entirely, in its minutest details, and giving it back to us in the form of art. It was his way of saying, "I see everything. I'm here." Adolescence was a difficult transition. School became a minefield of social interactions he didn't understand and academic expectations that didn't align with his way of learning. We tried everything. The journey to find a place for Noah in the world was paved with good intentions and painful results. We entered a cycle I call false hope. Each new specialist, each new therapy, each new school seemed to be the answer, the magic solution that would make everything fit. I vividly remember Dr. Martina Popescu, a school psychologist with a kind smile and an office full of plants. She told us that Noah's hyperfocus on drawing was an escape mechanism, a way to avoid social engagement. We need to encourage him to explore other areas, to develop conversational skills, to participate in group activities, she advised, with the best of intentions. We followed the advice. We limited his drawing time, enrolling him in debate clubs, theater classes, and team sports. It was a disaster. We saw our son, who was so serene and centered in his own universe, become an anxious and frightened creature. The sparkle in his eyes dimmed. He stopped drawing, but he also stopped being. His silence, once peaceful, became heavy, laden with a sadness he couldn't verbalize. Jacob, in his desperation to help, embraced these suggestions even more forcefully. He needs to try harder, Hannah. The world won't adapt to him. Our nights were filled with tense arguments, not from lack of love, but from an excess of fear. Fear for his future, fear of doing everything wrong. The biggest of these false hopes came in the form of a summer program for young talents at the local university, focused on architecture and urban design. It seemed perfect, an environment where his skill could finally be seen not as an obsession, but as a gift. The principal teacher was none other than Louis Schneider-Stan, a legend in the field of modern architecture, a man whose books Jacob idolized. "This is the chance, Hannah," my husband said, his eyes shining for the first time in months. "Someone like Schneider-Stan will recognize Noah's raw talent. He'll see what we see." The application process was complicated, but we managed it. Noah was accepted based on his portfolio, which included the city map he drew at 10 and dozens of other incredibly detailed works. During the 6 weeks of the program, Noah seemed reborn. He spent his days at the university and his nights hunched over his drawing table, working on his final project. He barely slept, fueled by a passion we'd feared had been extinguished. The project was to design a vision for the city's planned new innovation district, a multi-billion-dollar project led by construction giant Fan Corson, owned by Oliver Fan. Noah was fascinated. He studied the maps, the blueprints, the satellite images. He visited the site dozens of times, standing for hours, just observing. He was happy, and we, by contagion, were too. We believed we had finally found the way. We believed that the world, in the person of Professor Schneider-Stan, was finally ready to receive our son. The final presentation would be in a large auditorium, open to students, professors, and even some investors and urban planners. It was the climax of our hope. Little did we know we were walking straight to the edge of a precipice. That day should have been a celebration of Noah's talent, but it turned into the stage for the deepest conflict of our lives. The auditorium was packed. The air vibrated with a mixture of youthful ambition and academic pride. Jacob and I sat in the third row, our hearts beating in unison with anticipation. One by one, the students presented their projects: 3D models, digital renderings, eloquent speeches about sustainability and human-centered design. Then, it was Noah's turn. He walked to the stage silently, without looking at the audience. He didn't carry a laptop or a model, just a large roll of paper. He unrolled it on the large table in the center of the stage, securing the ends with weights. The silence in the room deepened. What was on the paper was breathtaking. It was an aerial view of the proposed innovation district, hand-drawn with a precision no software could replicate. Every street, every building, every tree was there. But there was more. Noah had drawn what was under the surface. Subtle lines indicated old sewage pipes, underground water veins, and even what appeared to be small geological fault lines. Professor Louis Schneider-Stan, who was sitting in a prominent chair on stage, stood up. He walked slowly to the table, his expensive shoes making a sharp sound on the wooden floor. He looked at the drawing for a long time. I held my breath. Jacob squeezed my hand tightly. This was it, the moment of validation. Schneider-Stan picked up the microphone. His voice was deep and resonated with authority. "What we're seeing here," he began, "is a classic example of wasted talent." My stomach dropped. While his colleagues were thinking about the future, about functionality, about the beauty of form, Mr. King was cataloging cracks in the ground. Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. Noah remained motionless, his eyes fixed on a point in the corner of the drawing. "Architecture," the professor continued, his tone hardening, "is about vision, about imposing a new order on chaos. It's not about getting lost in irrelevant and useless details." He looked directly at Noah. "You don't have vision, boy. You're blind to what matters. You see the leaves, but you miss the entire forest." And then, he did the unthinkable. With a quick, deliberate movement, he grabbed one end of the drawing and ripped it in half. The sound cut through the air. He ripped again, and again, The pieces of Noah's universe fell to the floor. That's when he said the words that were seared into my memory. This isn't art, it's not architecture, it's a useless obsession, and you're blind to the real world. Noah's collapse was immediate and total. The swaying, the hands over his ears, a low moan that was the pure sound of pain. I ran to the stage. Ignoring the shocked stares and whispers, Jacob remained paralyzed in his seat, his face a mask of horror and confusion. He who admired that man so much saw his idol destroy his son. In that moment, the conflict wasn't just between Noah and the professor. It was between my unwavering faith in my son and the validation of the world that Jacob so desperately sought. It was between acceptance and conformity. And for me, it was war. As I helped Noah off the stage, stepping over the scattered pieces of his soul, I made a silent promise. They wouldn't break him. I wouldn't let them. In the days that followed, our house fell silent. Not the peaceful silence of Noah concentrating on his work, but a heavy, sickening silence. Noah wouldn't leave his room. He didn't draw. He barely ate. He just sat on his bed, swaying gently, lost in a place where we couldn't reach him. Jacob was devastated. Guilt and shame consumed him. I put him there, Hannah. I pushed him to that man. I didn't have the energy to comfort him. My only mission was to pick up the pieces, literally and figuratively. On the night of the incident, after putting Noah to bed, I returned to the empty auditorium. The janitors had already cleaned up, but I searched the trash and found the pieces of his drawing. I spent the entire night on the living room floor with tape and a sore chest, trying to reassemble the city map my son had created. It was a puzzle of over 100 pieces. As I put the fragments together, I began to notice the details the professor had called useless. The lines indicating the old pipes, the different shadings that seemed to show the density of the soil. It was more than a drawing. It was a topographic analysis. That's when the turning point began. Not with a bang, but with a soft knock on the door. It was a woman I didn't know. She introduced herself as Dr. Sophia Scott, a visiting geographer and cartographer from the university, who had been in the audience during the presentation. "I'm so sorry for what happened to your son," she said, her voice calm and sincere. I can see the drawing?" Hesitantly, I led her to the living room, where the patched-up map covered almost the entire rug. Sophia knelt down. She didn't say anything for almost 10 minutes. She just looked, her eyes tracing the lines with an intensity I recognized. It was the same intensity with which Noah looked at the world. Finally, she looked at me. "Where did he get this data?" she asked, her voice a whisper of astonishment. "What data? He just looks," I replied. She shook her head, incredulous. "This isn't possible. Look." She pointed to an area in the corner of the map, where Noah had drawn a series of fine, crisscrossed lines. "This is an unstable aquifer, and here," she moved her finger to another section, "is a zone of soil liquefaction. They aren't on the official maps. This information could only be obtained with extremely expensive geophysical surveys. Or," she paused, "with superhuman observational skills." She stood up and began to pace the room, excitement growing in her voice. "The official FanCorp plans for the district, which Professor Schneider Stan approved as a consultant, ignore all of this. They plan to build 50-story towers right here on the most unstable soil. It would be a disaster waiting to happen." It was as if a light had been switched on in the dark room of my sadness. Noah's useless obsessions, the irrelevant details, they were warnings. They were the truth. The silent turning point wasn't a moment of confrontation but of revelation. There, on my living room floor, on the torn remains of my son's work, I realized that the blindness wasn't Noah's. The blindness was the world's. And his drawing wasn't just art. It was proof. The first small victory was telling Jacob. When I explained what Dr. Scott had discovered, I saw the transformation on his face. Confusion gave way to clarity, shame to anger, and doubt to a fierce faith in his son. For the first time, he didn't see Noah's autism as a handicap, but as the superpower it truly was. "He saw. All along he saw," Jacob repeated, pacing back and forth. "That arrogant, he didn't humiliate him for being different. He humiliated him because Noah saw something he didn't want anyone to see. That moment united our family in a way that years of therapy hadn't. We had a cause. We had the truth on our side. Dr. Sophia Scott became our unlikely ally. She used her credentials to gain access to the city's confidential geological reports. What she found confirmed everything. The original reports from years ago warned about the instability of the soil in that area, but the more recent reports, commissioned by FanCorp and signed by a consulting firm linked to Louis Schneider-Stan, had been grossly altered. The fraud was massive, involving millions of dollars in foundation cost savings, putting thousands of future lives at risk. The next victory was seeing Noah come back to himself. One day, Jacob entered his room with a new blank sheet of paper, the same size as the one that had been destroyed. He unrolled it on Noah's table. "Son," he said, his voice choked, "we need you. Dr. Scott needs your help. Your drawings. They're important. They can save people." Noah looked at his father, then at the paper. For a long time, he didn't move. Then slowly, he picked up a pencil, and he began to draw. This time, it wasn't just for passion. There was a purpose. He worked with Sophia, circling the danger areas on his map, adding notes and symbols that only he and she seemed to understand. Watching them together was fascinating. The cutting-edge scientist and the boy who spoke with lines, communicating in a visual language that transcended words. With a complete dossier in hand, Noah's patched-up map, his new detailed map, the fraudulent reports, and Sophia's analysis, we contacted a renowned investigative journalist, Amir Boss. He listened to the story with an initial skepticism that quickly turned to shock. The final piece of the puzzle came when Noah, during a conversation with Amir and Sophia, pointed to a signature on the fraudulent report. It was Louis Schneider-Stan's name. And then, Noah spoke his first words in weeks. He didn't look at anyone, just at the paper. "The line of his signature," he said, his voice monotone. "It's weak." He was afraid. It was a knockout blow. Noah's observation wasn't just about geology. It was about human nature. Amir Boss's article was published on the cover of a national newspaper. The headline was explosive. "Autistic Teen's Map Reveals Multi-million-dollar Fraud in Urban Project." The story spread like wildfire. Every interview we gave, every time Noah's drawing was shown on television was a small victory. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about the world finally learning to look through my son's eyes and see the truth that had always been there. Looking back, the most profound transformation wasn't the one that happened in the newspapers or the courts. It was the one that happened within me, within Jacob, within our home. For years, my main goal was to protect Noah from the world. I built walls around him, trying to cushion the blows, smooth the rough edges of a society that wasn't designed for him. I loved him fiercely, but my love was, in part, based on fear. I saw his sensitivity as a fragility, his uncompromising honesty as a dangerous naivete. The incident in the auditorium, however brutal, broke down those walls, and in the open space something new could grow. I stopped seeing my son as someone who needed to be fixed or protected. I began to see him as someone who had something to teach us. Professor Schneider-Stan called him blind, but the truth is that we were the blind ones. We were blind to the corruption happening right under our noses. We were blind to the way society values eloquence over truth, appearance over substance. Noah, with his unfiltered brain, who didn't care about social hierarchies or diplomatic subtleties, saw only what was real. The lines on the ground were more real to him than the reputation of a famous professor. The structural integrity of a building was more important than the polished speech of a CEO. I realized that true acceptance isn't just tolerating someone's differences. It's not just saying, "I love you the way you are." True acceptance is recognizing that those differences are sources of strength, of wisdom, of a unique perspective that the world desperately needs. It's understanding that Noah's obsession wasn't a disease. It was a discipline. His silence wasn't an emptiness. It was a space for profound observation. His difficulty with social interactions wasn't a defect. It was an immunity to group pressure and falsehood. Jacob also underwent this reflection. One night he told me, "I spent so much time trying to teach Noah to live in our world that I never stopped to think that maybe we should learn to live a little in his. A world where facts matter more than opinions and where truth is non-negotiable." That was the moment when healing truly began. The anger towards Professor Schneider-Stan dissipated, replaced by a kind of pity. He was the true prisoner, locked in his own arrogance, in his own world of appearances. He ripped up Noah's drawing, But it was Noah who exposed how fragile the professor's world truly was. The greatest reflection was on value. What does our society value? What do we consider smart or successful? Noah's story forced us to confront these questions. He didn't fit into any conventional metrics, and yet, his contribution was more significant than that of all the experts and executives combined. He didn't change to adapt to the world. The world had to move to reach him. The outcome of the story wasn't a fairy tale ending where all problems disappear. Life doesn't work that way. Noah is still autistic. He still has days when the world is noisy and overwhelming. The pain of public humiliation hasn't been completely erased. It has become part of his story, a scar that reminds him of both the wound and the healing. But what changed was the ecosystem around him. The scandal that Noah's drawing exposed had real consequences. FanCorp became the target of a federal investigation. Oliver Fan and several executives were indicted. The Innovation District project was suspended, and a new citizen oversight committee was created to reevaluate all major construction projects in the city. As for Louis Schneider-Stan, his career imploded. The university fired him, and the architecture community repudiated him. His downfall wasn't caused by a conspiracy or a calculated attack. He was undone by the factual truth contained in the drawing of a boy he considered invisible. The real victory, however, wasn't the downfall of others, but Noah's ascent. He began receiving letters and emails from all over the world. From other parents of autistic children who felt seen, from engineers who were amazed by his precision, from artists who were inspired by his dedication. The world that had once rejected him now sought him out. The most surprising offer came from a consortium of universities and engineering firms. They created a full scholarship, a completely new fellowship program, designed around Noah's unique abilities. It wasn't a traditional school. It was a laboratory, a place where he could use his talent to analyze complex visual data, from satellite images to predict natural disasters to analyzing industrial plants to find safety flaws. They didn't want to change him. They wanted to learn from him. The scene I hold in my heart is the day we visited this new place. Noah walked through the spacious, brightly lit space filled with giant screens and drawing tables. He didn't seem intimidated. For the first time, I saw him in an environment that seemed to have been made for him. He went to one of the screens showing a complex geological map, traced a line with his finger, and said to one of the chief engineers, a man named Daniel Ivanov, "The tension is here. It will break." The engineer looked at the screen, then at his own data, and his eyes widened. Jacob and I looked at each other, and a shared smile, full of relief and pride, passed between us. The pain of the past hasn't disappeared, but now it has a counterpoint. We have tools we didn't have before, a deeper understanding, a supportive community, and most importantly, the unwavering certainty of Noah's worth. He taught us that sometimes, the people who seem most lost are the ones who are actually holding the map. Hope, for us, isn't the absence of difficulties. It's the certainty that we have the strength to face them, not in spite of who we are, but because of who we are. The truest voice isn't always the loudest. Often it's a whisper, a drawing, a line traced on paper that shows where the world is broken. The lesson I learned from my son Noah is that true vision isn't about what we look at, but about what we truly see. It's a lesson about finding strength in difference and truth in silence. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you think or feel, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your interaction helps these stories reach more people, and you never know, someone somewhere might need to hear exactly this today, so that they remember that their voice, however unique, matters.